important tissue for the stability of the spine and for locomotion too. And nobody wanted to believe him. And he fought it and he fought it, and now everybody is believing him. And nobody believed the reflex I shot from the ligament in anterior cruciate ligament. It took 3 years to publish this paper. So I am very sympathetic to your troubles in the early years. He is now retired, so he can enjoy life.
Thank you. Thank you, Moshe. You justified why I took early retirement. And now, you know, when I was a first-year student, I had an old professor, which at that time had my age now, and he told me this. He said, "Serge, physics is wonderful because you know that whatever you do, somebody else will show that you are wrong. And now that you know that everything I will tell you is wrong, there is no point for you to disagree with me." Now that I have taken care of the opposition, let me say that I will imitate the accent of a French-speaking person. Now, the question as to why are we here so late in time, looking at the fascia, can be traced at the fact that it's very difficult to assess the mechanical condition in vivo of collagen material, whereas an EMG will tell you what the muscles have done. So you have an entire generation of people that were sidetracked by the easiness by which you can measure electromuscular activity. And they simply forget that it's only one part of the equation. Now, in terms of part of the equations, the term functional anatomy, you have to take it with a word of caution, because what comes first is not the anatomy, but the function. You have to decide if you want to cross a river with a bridge or an airplane. Having done that, you design the bridge. So function goes first, and anatomy will follow. That's the rule of survival. Now, the history of the fascia can be traced by Harry Farfan in the 60s and 70s, who was the first one to propose that the fascia was transmitting forces from the iliac crest all the way to the upper extremities. Bogduk in the 1980s established the anatomical structures from the pelvis up. And Fleming in 1990 clarified through his work what happens from the pelvis down. And two things are happening here. Fleming let me know his work in 1990, and you know, a bulb clicked in my mind, because for the first time you could finally integrate what happened from the foot to the arm. And the same thing happens yesterday with the fourth speaker, which we had in the morning, who described how stress was affecting the cells itself. And now we can integrate all of that from the cell itself to the understanding of how the spine reacts during gait when it's subjected to the gravitational field. And I found those ideas of integration of the conference to be very helpful in that regard. Now, the function of the fascia is obvious for a long time. It transmits forces. But the question is, how does it exactly, and why in the clinic, truly, you don't really care? The roots of the confusion were started very early. It's an idea that was propagated since the 1940s, namely that back muscles do the lifting. And it's still believed today, in spite of the evidence to the contrary. For example, this is what was proposed, that a load you try to lift will be balanced by the action of the erectores spinae group. Now, the catch here is that you can calculate how much forces can be exerted here, and you can then assess that 50 kilo is the maximum you can lift. You know we lift 200 kilo. So to explain why you can lift 200 kilos, Barthelin proposed that the abdominal pressure will be raising to push the diaphragm to help you. The problem here is that for 200 kilo, you will have a serious problem. So my advice to you is to make sure you ask the patient to pay before training him. So now, since you see, research can be a lot of fun sometimes. Now, the mistake, I was part of the mistake at the time, so I can talk very freely because I criticize myself. The mistake was that we knew there were muscle redundancy. But the problem is that we saw it as a nuisance because we wanted to find the best posture. We needed one unique solution, and we were confronted with a bunch of muscles that could achieve this solution. So the question at the time was, how can we fire those bloody muscles to give you a so-called best posture? And we use optimization techniques. This is a mathematical term we say that we are going to determine the muscle actions that will balance the load and minimize the stress. Now the first problem here, which I will come back, is stress of what? Well, we assume that there were sensors somehow that will give us stress information. That was 1975. I had no clue that there was stuff in the fascia at the time, but we had to hypothesize the existence of sensors feeding information to calculate the best muscle actions. And here is the second mistake that was done, is that there were two kinds of results. The first result was a desirable effect, a unique solution, the best posture. But an undesirable effect was that the calculation shows you had to have negative muscles. We don't have muscles that push, they pull. And so the mathematical wizard of the time said, well, negative muscle, I'm going to circumvent the problem by writing a constraint saying that the mathematical solution I want can only have positive muscles. And therefore, the game was determine the muscle action that will balance the load, minimize the strain under the constraint that the muscle has to be positive. But you know, I have a problem with this one, is that I am not constrained. And so, instead of fooling around with a constraint, which is a mathematical artifact, why not say that the model was wrong in the first place? And so the real question is, how can we modify the model to generate positive solutions without any fooling around? That was a very nasty question to ask. So I took back to the model, looked, and the model, although it has some nonlinearities, is essentially a problem of linear algebra. And you end up having a matrix which has to be positive definite. It's a mathematical term to say that something in the matrix describing the system had to be made, to be done, so that the solution is always positive. And what it is modifies the term of the diagonal of the matrix, and then you look at the mathematical changes which you did to have a positive muscle, and you map it back to the anatomy. And when we map it back, we realize there had to be some link between the crest and the spinous processes. I am not a clinician. I cannot even feel my own pulse. So I asked Bob Duke in 1982 in a conference in Paris, do you have anything linking the pelvis, the iliac crest to the spinous processes? He said, of course, it's a lumbodorsal fascia. That was my introduction to the fascia. So the fascia is necessary to have a natural solution with muscles that pull. So we are talking of more than a force transmission system here. We are talking of something that will permit minimization of stress on the spine, permit the muscle to function physiologically for a change, and no fascia means excessive stress and instability. Now, failed back surgery is a widely used term, but the surgeon, to go under the layers of fascia, usually create a heck of a lot of damage to the fascia. And now we know that without the fascia, the subject will need negative muscle. He doesn't have any negative muscle, so you increase the stress on the spine to do anything to a level which is unacceptable. In other words, no fascia or damaged fascia, no efficient control of muscles, and the rehabilitation is questionable. You may not be able to do it because you don't have a critical structural component there. So finally, we changed the anatomy, adding the fascia to explain this.